Penn State, I won't say got lucky, but really got a good player in the transfer portal when they got Arnold Ebiketie from Temple, who came in and had one of the best pass rushing seasons for Penn State football in recent history. Can they do that again? And do they need that again? That's going to be a big question coming into this show here on our BWI Daily Two-A-Days as we take a look at the defensive line. And then on the interior, is the hype about Zane Durant true? What's the story with PJ Mustipher? How much should you expect from him during this season? All those questions answered on the BWI Daily Edition. Training Camp Two-A-Days here on the BWI Daily Edition, giving you extra content, getting you psyched for Penn State football as we get into the first week of training camp. I'm your host, Thomas Frank Carr, bringing in senior editor Nate Baur, as always, as we preview the defensive line. Now, we've done position by position, but we did the O-line together, so we're doing the D-line together. Defensive tackles, defensive ends. So this group, despite having a lot of returning faces, has some important turnover, Nate. Set the scene for us along the defensive line for Penn State football.
Oh, boy. Where do we start? Certainly, you can't, to me, start anywhere other than Arnold Ebiketie and Jesse Luketa not being on the team this year, right? Like, those guys are in the NFL. And so because of that, you've lost really 2/3 of the equation for what your defensive end position looked like last season. And as you so eloquently stated in the intro, in Ebiketie, what a strike gold, right? Like he just to be able to have brought in a player of his caliber who ended up being a second round NFL draft pick, like that's difficult. That's a tall task to be able to replace that type of production and that type of, high end talent. And really not just him, you're talking about back-to-back years, right? Adisa Isaac was a first rounder. So you've got a first and a second rounder in back-to-back years. I think it is a fair question to ask whether or not the players that are kind of vying to step into that role, whether or not they can live up to that, or whether it's even fair to expect them to live up to that. Right. So that's the start. And then obviously looking at defensive tackle, PJ Mustipher is the huge question, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you got to wonder where he is, and then everything that flows from there, right? If PJ Mustipher isn't the central figure of that equation at defensive tackle, then it raises more questions. I think that it is essential that the defensive line is able to live up to and maybe even exceed some of what it's done over the last couple of years.
Certainly have to exceed the expectations for the aggregate this year, right? In terms of certain players have to play better than just being a depth player. Certain players have to play better than being a true freshman or being new to the system, or because everyone's new to the system, there has to be a little bit more of, I've called it before, shortening the learning curve. Producing outside of that. But let's introduce here at the beginning of camp, and this is important to kind of lay this out, because there's a lot of question marks about this particular group, whether or not the starting moniker matters as much as as you mentioned, there's a lot of names, can be a lot of people we talk about, but these are, as of now, the presumed starters for the Penn State defensive line. And you'll know the names as they come up here on the screen. All veteran players. Hakeem Beamon didn't see the field last year. He's back. PJ Mustipher got injured. He's back. Adisa Isaac injured. He's back. Nick Tarburton, presumed starter right now. And we're going to give him that as the veteran returning player, as he is the presumed starter at that other defensive end position. So that group on its surface, I don't know that gets a lot of people very excited about the potential of this group, but talk about those veteran players and how they fit into the puzzle as we begin this tour of the position.
Yeah, to me, so much of it starts with Adisa Isaac and really Hakeem Beamon. I mean, they're virtually the same story, even though they missed last year for different reasons. It's just a question of the anticipation for them going into the 2021 season was quite high, right? Like both of those guys were expected coming off of 2020 to be a big factor in what Penn State was able to do on the defensive line, and Penn State ended up having neither available. Yeah. So is Hakeem Beamon, like, bottom line, is Hakeem Beamon and what he represented before 2021, is that still good enough and or better than what's happened to everybody else in the meantime? But what is the impact of that?
Yeah.
Isaac is coming off of an injury that is, debilitating, right? Like, I mean, I'm not going to dance around it. It's an Achilles. And so to come back from an Achilles in a year, he obviously has a little bit more of a running start than PJ Mustipher.
Yeah.
That his injury occurred, I believe, in June of last year. So the window is a little bit larger, 14 months, 15 months, but by the time he gets back on the field. But for both of those guys and what Penn State wants to do in terms of a pass rush perspective, particularly, it's extremely important that they hit, that these guys come through. So we'll see.
Just as a quick update, I'm going to introduce now the rest of the players at the position of the defensive tackles, defensive line, important players. We've already mentioned a bunch of them, but just give you formally everybody at the position that we think are going to be factors in this group. You have, of course, these are the depth players that we know we're going to be a part of the rotation in some form or fashion. Defensive end Smith Vilbert, Amin Vanover, currently a defensive end on the roster, Devon Ellis and Keziah Izzard at defensive tackle. And then, of course, the other notable names. Huge man crush on Jordan Vandenberg and his potential on this show in particular. And just to give you a quick update, Amin Vanover, 266 pounds, as listed on the roster as of today. And let me find Hakeem Beamon, 261 pounds. Those two have been flipping back and forth as whether or not they're defensive tackle or defensive end for, I think, 5-6 years now. Of course, let's just get right into it and let's give you the important players at the new, we're calling these the new players, although most of them are freshmen. And here you see 5-star defensive end Dennis Sutton. You have Chop Robinson. And of course, you have some of the other younger players that aren't expected to be a part of this rotation right away, but are freshmen here in the class of 2022. So now that we have everybody introduced, and we have our starting defensive line, which I'll throw back up here on the screen. How long before this group looks different?
Yeah.
Because that's a big question about this group.
It could be September 1. It might be even before that, right? I mean, certainly Adisa Isaac is absolutely part of the conversation. So is Nick Tarburton, obviously. And I think that Tarburton is trending toward being a starter, but Chop Robinson is going to be somewhere, right? Whether he's a rotational player or somebody who can step in and start right away. What does that mean in terms of displacing Adisa Isaac or not? To be determined. But certainly that's one. I think defensive tackle is another place where, you don't know what's going to happen with PJ Mustipher. They say that he's 100%. He says he's 100%. You and I are on the same page here. We're going to believe it when we see it. And so best of luck to the kid. Hopefully the rehab is where he wants it to be. And he feels confident enough to play on it at full strength. But that's tough. That's a tough task. To me, it's fairly clear that Devon Ellis is the backup there, right? Yes. So maybe Devon Ellis is the guy that you see in that first game in a heavier rotational role than it would be otherwise, depending on where Mustipher is at.
Let's stay at the defensive tackle position a little bit last year, because one of the biggest problems that Penn State had is once PJ Mustipher went down, the experience was not there between Devon Ellis and Keziah Izzard. Have they matured enough that switching schemes is going to change things for them? Or is the scheme switched to a more aggressive, one-gap penetrating defense? Is that a better thing, and we'll see more production from those players overall? Those two, I think, in particular, were a sore spot for Penn State fans and an evaluation point. So can you expect something better from the depth at defensive tackle this year?
Yeah, One, I think you can expect something better just by nature of having the luxury of that time and that experience. But also, I'm not sure that it was necessarily fair given the circumstances of how those guys got to be in those starting roles. They weren't supposed to be starters last year, right?
Right.
But they became starters by matter of circumstances. Um, I you handle the Manny Diaz effect, right? Because you know that better than I do. But I would just say hitching their wagon to PJ Mustipher to
Mhm.
me suggests some level of concern about what's behind him.
Yeah.
Because if right,
If there would be a lot of caveats about how we like the depth at the position, and when PJ comes
yeah,
back, it's not just about PJ, it's about the whole. We would heard a very different story, right?
with or without PJ, we're really thrilled about what the talent level is here.
Yeah.
And I don't think necessarily that we've heard that. That said, I think defensive tackle probably falls into some of the conversations that we've had elsewhere on
Mhm.
offense, right? The depth of the receivers. Maybe the ceiling of the group is not as high as it had been last year or the year before, but on the whole, the bottom of the I mean, there are 6 players at defensive tackle at least
Yeah.
who can play, who you can very easily conceive of and say, okay, well, you can have guys go down. You can lose players to injury and still feel pretty good about what you have at defensive tackles. The numbers are right. It's just a matter of is Zane Durant, right? For as much hype as he's gotten this offseason, and
Yeah.
seemingly for good reason. He does it all. He's consistent. He grabbed the attention of a lot of his teammates this past spring.
It's that defensive tackle position is a bit of a mystery, and it's one of the ones I'm interested in uncovering a little more when it comes to how they plan on deploying and using everybody. Are they going to use some guys in unconventional roles? Because I've broken it down a lot of times by that 3 technique versus the 1 technique, and PJ Mustipher, the nose tackle, the 1 technique, the guy that is playing, you're aligning him where you think they want to run. That's what it essentially means. So you've got Mustipher, you've got Ellis, Vandenberg, and Mulba are the guys that I consider in that role.
Mhm.
If Mustipher's not fully healthy and Ellis has not taken that step forward, I think very quickly you get into a concerning situation at the 1 tech. The 3 technique, I find that very interesting because you have 3 guys with upside, and one of them being a true freshman in Zane Durant. Izzard and Beamon there, you've got a legitimate opportunity for 3 players to take a step forward, or none of them, as you just
Right.
just pointed out.
Right.
So as much as there is a lot of depth in players, there are still a bunch of questions. Let's talk about the defensive end position, because I think you're in the same boat here. And here's why. We talk about Adisa Isaac as a returning veteran, and we talk about the talent of those pass rushers and the guys that we think need to take a step forward when it comes to the position and providing the pressure to make this defense hum, to make the scheme sing. Let me give you what they've done so far in their career. Adisa Isaac, 313 total career snaps, according to PFF. Chop Robinson, 263. Deni Dennis Sutton, 0. So when we talk about Nick Tarburton as he's a presumed starter, he's at least got 500. Like, he's got about a season's worth of starting reps under his belt.
Yep.
So should you be as optimistic about this group as James Franklin was on Big Ten Media Day?
Smith Vilbert's the guy that we never talk about. So I mean, I want to start there. But he is an option. He is a guy who is going to play there. But yeah, I mean, you're looking right. Isaac, Tarburton, Vilbert, Vanover, Robinson, and Deni Dennis Sutton, right?
Yeah.
Because the rest of it.
So let's declare our X factor for this group. And to me, it comes down to there are so many X factors for this particular group. But what it comes down to is the timeline. What is the timeline for the defensive line position? PJ Mustipher, what's his timeline towards a more full recovery where he is available for more snaps and more impactful snaps?
Yep.
Deny Dennis Sutton, what is his timeline of acclimation to the defense and to college football? Chop Robinson, what is his acclimation period? Adisa Isaac, what is his return from injury? Explosive pass rusher, get off the ball, get on the other side of the line of scrimmage. The timeline for these guys coming together and reaching a threshold of their upside is going to determine the success or failure, I believe, of the defensive line, and then by proxy, the defense. Anything on that you want to add?
You and I probably share the perspective of, you look at the group as names and everything that we've heard about them, everything that we know about them, and you say, or at least I say, man, they could be stacked.
Yes.
This defensive line could be really good. That the potential is there for excellence across the board.
So you are a perfect transition into this, what you saw there on the screen while Nate was talking. Stock up or stock down? What you just said, where does that land? Up or down? When all of the wheat is sorted, where are we? This one's tough.
Yeah, it is tough, because the problem is I can look at what I sold my shares of Arnold Ebiketie at.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
one player made a huge impact on that defense. He was the line in the sand between the secondary being hung out to dry and there being pressure on the quarterback so they could jump those routes and make those interceptions. That is a real thing. And the way he provided, especially on third down, can you replicate that with more people, but one, kind of like the conversation about tight end? Can you replicate that with multiple players and get the same result? That is, to me, the biggest question about this group, because the run defense will sort itself out, good or bad. But last year, the reason that defense was good is the secondary was great, and Ebiketie was there as the constant pressure for Penn State to get on the quarterback.
Yep. Yeah. So we're going to see. I think that I don't know that there's a first or second round pick. I mean, maybe deny who
this
knows,
year,
right?
But you're talking about you're talking about 2023 in that particular draft. Nobody on this group is a second round pick. Should have been a first round pick, by the way. In this particular group that's going next year, they're not going to have that level of production and athleticism and all those things. But to me, it's whether or not the guys that are in the 24, 25, are they first round picks?
Yep.
And how quickly they get there. I don't want to call it either. I don't want to do it, but we got to get out of here.
It's just too early. It's to be determined. I mean, I think you're buying, right?
There we go. We're buying shares. Maybe not. We're just buying shares.
Buy shares, because right now it might be as low as it gets.
And you can diversify your portfolio with as many players here as possible.
That's
correct. I love it when we find a great out of having to make a hard decision. That'll do it for our Two-A-Days here on the BWI YouTube channel and, of course, on our podcast. We're doing the BWI Daily Edition Monday through Friday now. It is back on Tuesdays, so you'll have 6 shows a week plus whatever we do live and our reports from training camp. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts.